Tasmania is the full stop at the bottom of the world, and we live on an island of stories. For years now, the Tamar Valley Writers Festival has celebrated our great thinkers, writers and readers, and now we're excited to share these insights globally. I'm Lyndon Rigol, and throughout this series, my colleague Annie Warburton and I will be talking to writers, playwrights, comedians, poets, editors, and all of those who share a love of the written word, right here on the Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast.
When Kate Kruimink won this year's Australian Vogel Prize, the nation's most prestigious literary award for a young author, it was by unanimous decision of the panel of 4 judges, one of whom said what impressed her and her fellow judges was Kruimink's assured voice. Voice is crucial to Kate's story, for it's the voice of someone totally unlike herself, a young Tasmanian woman struggling with motherhood and the work-life balance. The voice in Kate's story is that of Gabriel Fox, a young Englishman who comes to Van Diemen's Land in the 1840s on a mission to find Mary Ann McGinn, a woman sent there 30 years earlier. He's doing this at the behest of an older woman, a friend of his family in England, who wants to be reunited with Mary Ann. Gabriel is the 3rd son of an aristocratic family, and because he won't inherit the estate, he's free to seek his fortune however he may. The older woman gives Gabriel money to do the job, and there's the added incentive that if he succeeds, he might well win the hand of the young girl who is her ward. It's a story of love and loyalty, of youthful folly and the getting of wisdom, of family sorrows and guilt, of peril and hardship in the young convict colony, and of whaling. Now, the Vogel is worth $20,000 and is awarded annually to an unpublished manuscript by a writer under 35. It's launched the careers of writers such as Kate Grenville, Tim Winton, and our very own Tasmanian treasures Danielle Wood and Rowan Wilson. Kate Kruimink, congratulations on winning the Vogel.
Thank you so much, Annie. It's a very exciting time.
Tell us the exciting story about how you just met the deadline.
Oh gosh. So I was aware of the Vogel previously, and I started writing this book specifically to enter it. I Googled it because I had a relatively new daughter. She was a few months old, and like relatively new children do, she wasn't sleeping. And I was actually really shocked at the experience of new motherhood. There's no way you can really prepare yourself. You can read and talk, but you can't live it until it happens. And I found it quite shocking how sedentary it was, and also what a physical and emotional experience it was, quite separate from my intellectual self. And, obviously that's my experience. It's different for other people. But I really wanted to re-engage with that intellectual self, which for me had always taken the form of writing, or had best taken the form of writing. So I Googled the Vogel. I had about 8 months. I thought, okay, I'm going to do this as an exercise. So I'm going to complete something and submit it and let myself have a little daydream maybe. What if I won? And then just put it out of my head. That was the idea. So I wrote and wrote, usually with Edie, my daughter, actually on the breast, or sometimes I'd write in a cafe if my husband could have her for a while. I'd expressed enough milk and I was free for an hour. I'd go and have a write in a cafe. So I could sort of combine it with actually leaving the house. And I submitted it about 20 minutes before midnight on the final day. There's no deadline on the website. It wasn't 5 p.m. or something. So I thought, okay, let's call it midnight. So I sent it off. And as I said, I let myself have a little daydream and then I put it out of my head. And really, honestly, didn't expect anything to come of it.
So 20 minutes to go and you made the deadline.
Yes. I was bashing out the summary. You have to put on a page-long summary of the book. So just trying to make something coherent.
Now, it's curious that it wasn't until you learned that you'd won that you virtually had to add half the story again.
That's right.
It was 30,000 words when you submitted it.
Yeah.
And you wrote another 30,000 odd?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the reason is that the minimum word count is 30,000 words. And I was able to tell the story in those confines. It wasn't as fully rounded, and I think the main characters' motivations would have been pretty opaque without the extra word count. But the thing is that that's what made me get it done, is to write it in that pared down way and send it off. So when I found out I'd won the following September, timelines are very hazy around this time for obvious reasons of the exhaustion. When I found out, Annette Barlow, the publisher at Allen & Unwin in charge of the Vogel, said, congratulations, you've won, but also you need to double the word count in 2 months.
But they were prepared to give it to you.
They were.
As it was.
They were. And the reason for doubling it is because it just wasn't long enough to be really marketable as a novel, which I understand. I've written a novella in the past, which was only, 5,000 words shorter than the original manuscript, and that's a pamphlet, really. It's so short. So it was a gift in a way, because it made me able to get in all this backstory, which I hadn't done.
Well, let's look at the story. Now, it was the writer L.P. Hartley who said, wasn't it, in her novel The Go-Between, the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. Why did you set your story in this foreign country, and how did the idea come to you?
It sprang up when I was at uni. So I did English and History at the University of Tasmania and found that really inspiring, both the teaching across the board and also on the history side of it, it gave me access to things that I wouldn't have found before, primary sources. I read this document, it was the report of an autopsy by a 19th century doctor, and that sparked the idea for a story of a girl I called Marianne McGinn, who is, as you mentioned in your intro, the woman that the main character is looking for. And so that's the manuscript that I came back to when I started writing for the Vogel, because I'd started it then, but I actually found it too difficult. It's about this really young girl, and she goes through a lot of trauma, and it's quite sad. And I just didn't have the space emotionally, intellectually to go there. And so I found this little side character in there who was called Mr. Whiteley. And he was this English fop who was interested in what he called the voices of the diaspora, so how English was changing across the colonies as they were then. And he'd come to this whaling station to buy it, and he could see it wasn't going to be a very good deal. And I thought that his story might be interesting and emotionally quite safe for me. So I pulled him out. But as I wrote him, he became younger and more confused and more lost, and I changed his name to Gabriel. And I came to realise he was a lot like I was at 25, which is his age, pretty lost and pretty well-meaning, making some silly choices, but coming good.
You're not the first author I've met who tells the story of their characters sort of taking over and becoming agents in their own right. And you no longer talk about them as, I had him do this and I decided that he was going to be like that. You say, well, he became younger and more confused. How does that process work?
Something that I really love about stories is how they have their own internal logic and their own internal resonance, as opposed to this nonsense that we call reality, which is this sort of six-dimensional cobweb going in all directions with context and complication and no beginning and no end. A story is nicely encapsulated. And I find, for me, once I start writing in that world, I sort of discover the logic of it as I go. And I think that's what draws me along, is that logic.
So Gabriel has his share of adventures and misadventures, a lot of misfortunes, a lot of it caused by his own folly. He gambles, loses a lot of his most useful possessions gambling early on, but he wins a pair of whaling harpoons, which come into the story later. It reads like a first-person memoir, as if a young man from mid-19th century England had actually written it. How did you get the voice so completely accurate?
Well, thank you very much. That's a lovely observation to make. There are a couple of aspects to this. So one is that when I was younger, like a teen, I went through this period that a lot of nerdy teens go through where you feel like you have to read every single classic that ever existed. So I was pretty steeped in that stuff at a fairly formative age. So that was sort of the background of it. And then I think also I sort of came to a point where I'm interested in engaging in the human experience in literature. So something that I love about good literature, especially from the past or from a completely different culture from my own, is how it can speak to me even across divides of time and space. Like in Shakespeare, I've forgotten the play, but there's a moment where there's a lord and his servant and they're looking at clouds. And he says, you know, oh, that's a camel, and the servant says, no, it's a whale. And that gave me such hope, actually, that the human experience is something that has a continuity to it. So I wasn't really trying to write an antique character. I was just trying to write this character who was beginning, as we discussed, to feel quite real to me, with this voice that I had read a lot of in the past.
It seems to me a lot of modern writers make the mistake of imagining the past through the prism of modern eyes, and their characters come across sounding like moderns. But Gabriel doesn't. He talks in that sort of florid, formal way that was current in the 19th century. He capitalises the initials of abstract nouns and adjectives like patience and virtue and so on. Did you research that, or how did it come to you?
I researched it along the way. So I just began, I just went for it. I didn't do a lot of reading to get set up or anything, but I'd find myself using some word or phrase that I thought sounded a bit discordant, like it was like a slap in the face or something. And then I would actually go to the Oxford English Dictionary, which has excellent quotations under words and phrases. So you can look back at earlier uses of the word or phrase and how they were used, and if it would have been some obscure academic thing that no one would have known about, or if it would have been something that a posh young man would have known, so that I could kind of ground it in that way when something felt wrong to me. So a lot of it was quite intuitive.
Well, I didn't detect a whiff of anachronism.
Thank you, that's good.
Although my eye lingered on the word broccoli.
Yes.
He describes someone as having a head of hair like broccoli.
Yeah.
Did they eat broccoli in 19th century England, the colonies?
I don't know about the colonies. Broccoli, so this was something that I researched because I wrote it and then I thought, is this Kate or is this Gabriel, thinking about broccoli? So it apparently was Italian, hence the Italian sounding name. In England it was called Italian asparagus and was, I think, not very well known. I've had people who grew up in England challenge me on that, saying I didn't have broccoli. So my thinking was that he is a well-travelled, young, moneyed, leisured man. He would have done a tour of the continent and come across broccoli. But I had to use it. The hair was broccoli in my head. It was just broccoli.
All right. Well, he meets a fellow who he dubs my cannibal, about whom we learn a lot more as the story progresses. Tell us about the cannibal. Who is he? Why is he called the cannibal?
He's called the cannibal because Gabriel has heard the story of Alexander Pierce, the convict cannibal, who was an Irishman, of course, and was literally a cannibal. And I guess I use this partly as a way to show, you know, you talked about writing the character not from a modern perspective, but from the character's perspective, which I wanted to do. But I also didn't want to leave it unexamined. I didn't want to show, you know, that his blithe assumptions were fine. And so I think, you know, he meets this Irishman. He's Irish and he assumes he's a cannibal because he's got this very bedraggled appearance, he's got this crazy hair, he's got bad teeth, and he's heard about Alexander Pierce. So he extrapolates, okay, this guy's probably a cannibal, and he calls him that in his head. And as we go along, we learn that of course he's not, and he's this young man, and he's accompanied his father out to the colonies because his father was transported and he didn't want him to be alone. And he's got this whole life. But it was just Gabriel's preconceptions that he had to be the cannibal.
Well, Gabriel is a young man. He's naive. He doesn't know who to trust, and we can't blame him for that, can we? And his impatience leads him to make some unwise choices. Of course, we don't want to give away too much of the story because a lot of it depends on this colourful anecdote. So essentially his mission then becomes to find a whaling station and sell the harpoons because he needs to fund his continuing quest for Mary Ann McGinn. And he somehow comes to believe, or is led to believe, that he will find a whaling station, they'll buy the harpoons from him. Along the way, he daydreams about life back in England, Susanna, the young girl whose hand he hopes to win. Also, as he goes along, his family story unfolds, and that's a story with some dark elements. Now, you had just lost your mother.
That's
when
right.
You were, yes. And Gabriel's mother features strongly in the story.
She does. And I was a mother, newly.
That's right, with your first child.
Yes.
Yes. Or tell us more about the mother motif.
Well, there needed to be a reason why Gabriel was not engaging with what was around him. So he is a very silly and naive character, and he goes along and is very easily led. But why? You know, I think that could be quite irritating to read without explanation. And so the explanation is that he has this quite terrible thing going on back at home. And what he's doing now is a bit of a distraction. Someone has presented him with this quest, this task, which is exciting and he thinks manly and might win him the girl. And it's enabled him to basically run away from this situation back home centred around his family of origin and his mother. And the quest ends up being his slow realisation that he needs to go back, perhaps, and address things there and make a braver choice. I don't really know where it came from. It unfolded very organically. That stuff, that is what the 30,000 words extra was that I wrote. So it was all already there in my head, so I knew the characters' motivations. But I sort of came to think of his journey as like a circle, leading him inevitably back to address the wrongs back home.
Meanwhile, he finds the whaling community. He wants to sell the harpoons, which have become about the only thing that's left to him after everything else useful's been stolen. They want to sell the station to him.
Yes.
Because they think he's a toff, which he is, even though he's a penniless toff. But they want to sell... Well, tell us something about whaling then. That one of the characters remarks to him that whaling is depleted already.
Yes, that's right. So it's 1842, and it's only taken this space of about 40 years for southern right whales, which is what was looked for, to be basically whaled out. So obviously they weren't driven extinct, thank God, because they're returning now. But the industry was crumbling. And there were sort of two aspects to the industry. There was shore-based whaling, which is what Gabriel experiences in the book, as well as what we think of more traditionally as those big whaling ships going out. So he comes to this place which has been sort of painted to him as his salvation. He's going to get rid of these harpoons, someone's going to buy them from him. And he gets there and it's this crumbling ruin, and actually they're looking to him as their salvation. And just one of the many ways that he fundamentally misunderstands what's going on around him.
While he's there, a whale is sighted, and there follows an account of an expedition to hunt the whale. Mm-hmm. And it's quite scary, isn't it? And it's certainly dangerous. The way you describe it, it sounds like you've had that experience. Have you been out on the ocean in an open boat?
I've been in dinghies. No, I've never had an experience like that, no. I think that was just my imagination and my reading. And I found the most inspiring reading around that was this article on the archaeology of shore-based whaling, which had diagrams of the kinds of tools that they'd used. And I could use it to really get a sense of the physicality of just what happened. And the other thing that really inspired me was the fluted Cape walk at Bruni. Have you done that one?
I have not.
Well, it's beautiful, you must. And as you pop out the end, you come across the ruins of this shore-based whaling station. And so you can kind of, it was a beautiful day. I was with friends, I was feeling happy. But thinking of, winter as the whaling season and being far from anyone else with rudimentary tools and so on, it would have been a pretty grim existence, I think.
The Australian Book Review's reviewer says that your story has a lot in common with Moby Dick. Do you go along with that?
Well, it's a great compliment, so yeah, even if not sincerely, I'll go along with it. It's funny because to me the book is not about whaling. It's an important element in the book, but the actual whale hunt is confined to one chapter, I think, one or two. So of course I can see the connections there. There's the first person narrator who's this young man who's discovering a new world. I do think the focus of the story is quite different.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Amanda Ducker in the Hobart Mercury says, You're in deep disguise as this young third son of an aristocratic family, kind of banished to the colonies. What's your take on the modern notion that you shouldn't write in a voice that isn't of the identity to which you belong?
I don't know that I have a really fully formed opinion on this. But so this is more of a gut feeling, and that is that the answer to that can't be in restriction. We can't say, because so much of what is interesting and engaging and dynamic about the arts is in exploration, I think. To me, I think the heart of that problem is, or the solution to the problem, I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, is opening things up. Because of course we know that historically and now certain voices are squashed. You know, that there's historically no room for you if you're not a white man, and then, you know, a white man or a woman. And so just making sure that there's room for everybody. I think that this question will evolve as opportunities widen.
And there's the power analysis, isn't there? So that a person from a weaker group supposedly is allowed to speak in the voice of a power group. So you can write in the voice of Gabriel Fox. Hilary Mantel can write as Thomas Cromwell and win 2 Booker Prizes in doing so. I believe Hilary Mantel was an influence on you.
Well, I hesitate to say that because I feel like I might sound like I'm comparing myself to her, and I'm not. I just love her. I just think she's great. And there are a few authors like that who I just think are wonderful, and I sort of read everything that they've ever written, and I just find it really inspiring and energising to read writing that great.
What other writers have influenced you?
Well, the other one who really comes to mind is Kazuo Ishiguro, the English novelist. His most recent novel, The Buried Giant, just grabbed me. He's got that sense of strangeness about him and mystery that I just love. Not spelling everything out, not laying it all out, but letting the reader mosey along in a bit of a fog for much of it. I love that.
Let's talk a bit more now about the process of writing. Are you working on something new now?
I am, and I've committed because I've just bought Scrivener, so it's happening.
Scrivener?
Yeah, it's writing software that I really like. Yeah. So I'm working on something set in the present day, and I've tentatively called it Heartsease, after the flower. I started from the point of wanting to really write about organ donation. I've always been an organ donor since I turned 18, but to me it was just an abstract notion, you know, yeah, that sounds like a good thing and I'll do that. But when my mother died, she died in a really unexpected way that meant she was a great organ donor. And she had told us very clearly, even though she was very healthy and quite young, you know, at the dinner table one night, just so you know, I want to be an organ donor and they can have everything. And it was such a gift. Firstly, to have that clarity, to know exactly what she wanted. Even though we probably would have said yes anyway, we knew without a shadow of a doubt. There's no reason to lie awake at night thinking, is this what she wanted? And secondly, to know that there are 6 people out in the world who are alive or have better quality of life as a direct result of her death. And that's a kind of cognitive dissonance because her death was terrible. I don't want it to have happened, but also I'm so happy that those people were able to receive mum's organs. And there's just such richness there, you know? And then even on the physical level, you know, the DNA of my mother is still alive. So that's what I'm working on. And as I'm writing, again, you know, it's got that internal logic and it's flowing away from that as a focus. It's the story of 2 sisters and one of them dies. But I'm finding it hard because I don't have an 8-month deadline and I have to power it all out. I'm finding it hard to focus.
You could use a deadline.
I could, yeah, I could choose something.
How's managing Edie, the baby, going?
Pretty well. She's 2.5 now, so often I'm the baby. She'll sometimes just start calling me my girl, and suddenly she's the mummy and I'm the daughter. So she has actually led me to some new understandings about how story works, because obviously she's really interested in stories and I tell her stories. We often talk in stories. Suddenly we're pirates or something and we have to eat dinner as pirates and that's a story. But a couple of the stories I tell her, there's one we call the boat story, and it's like a conversation. So we get to the jetty and I say, "And what sound do our feet make on the jetty?" And she says, "Pitter-patter, pitter-patter." And one day she said, "Like the rain." And that to me was a bit of a breakthrough. I thought, this is actually a way of contextualizing the world. Feet on a jetty do sound like the rain, and she's made that connection just through this fictional world that we created together. Or, we were looking into the lily pond at the Botanical Gardens, and she said, "Oh, like Flash the tiger," who's another one of our characters who looks into ponds to look at his own self. So I find her quite inspiring in that way.
Do you get enough time for writing? Because you do have a job, you teach English as a second language.
Yep. Yeah. No, no, absolutely not. I feel like I don't have enough time for anything.
When you were told that you'd won the Vogel, and you were asked, did you want to do an acknowledgements page? You said no. Why was that? Were you just too shell-shocked?
I was too shell-shocked. I had no idea what was going on. I'd been through this 2-month period of smashing out another 30,000 words, again with Edie on the breast. And also I was really naive. This was all very new, and I hadn't gone through the process of submitting to agents or submitting to publishers and negotiating. It was just happening like this. So I said no to the acknowledgements page, and I wish I'd said yes, because there are so many people I'd love to thank in writing. So I guess it was time constraints, really.
But you did thank your husband, Matthew, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
That occurred to you.
Yes. Yeah, I remembered him in the end. Yeah.
Now, A Treacherous Country is your first published novel, but you say that you've always been a writer without necessarily knowing it.
Yeah, that's right. I think it might even be just in the way you observe the world. A writer is an observer. You have to be, don't you? Otherwise you have nothing to write. Mm. And I've often held myself back slightly to watch what's going on rather than join in fully. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Not all of them are good reasons, of course. But it's always been consistent with me that's been going on. And then because I was a reader, I guess that turned into writing.
When you were young, was writing some kind of refuge for you? Because I believe, you told Amanda Ducker that you experienced depression, insomnia, and an eating disorder round about when you were doing your TCE exams.
It actually started much earlier than that. It probably was a bit of a refuge. Reading was probably a bit of a refuge. But I was so dysfunctional around then. I don't remember a lot of specifics like that. I ended up dropping out of school. I was sent to a sort of a special support school for a while, which was one kind teacher with a couple of frail young people at a table, trying to get us through a few basic subjects. And I can't remember what happened with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite some leap though, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I didn't finish college. I got a score of 15, which is preposterously low, because a very kind teacher had submitted a couple of artworks I did. And at the time, I was very grateful to her. She was helping me, but I also felt ashamed to have such a low score, to have my entire school career judged by, a painting. But I understand she was doing it so I could be a high school leaver, which does matter, bureaucratically when applying for jobs and things.
And now you've won the nation's richest prize for a young author.
Yeah.
Is there any significance in the fact that your book is published under your initials, K.M. Kruimink? Why not Catherine or Kate?
Because I am a coward and initials feel really anonymous and safe. So that's the real reason. And then my husband said, well, isn't it, or can't you say that it's a lovely connection to your maternal line? And so that's what I would like it to be. That's not true, but that's, because my mother's name was Karen Margaret, so KM, and my grandmother was Margaret Mary. So there is a connection to both of them.
You weren't trying to sound mysterious about your gender, or?
Possibly there was some of that in there as well. Yeah. Being fond of mystery.
You talk about your maternal line. We've talked about your grandmother's story, and I thought immediately it sounded like a perfect subject for a future book.
Oh, wouldn't it be great?
Tell us something about it.
Yeah, well, she was actually an Australian girl from Perth, and she was remarkable. She was very beautiful and very clever. She, was accepted into uni to study psychology at the age of 15 and went for a while. She didn't finish for life reasons. And she met my opa, my grandfather, who was this dashing young naval officer striding around Perth in his whites. And she picked him up in the street and they fell madly, desperately in love and married against the wishes of her family because she was a Catholic.
So he was a Dutch naval officer in Australia?
Yeah, in Perth, yes.
In Perth.
Yeah, in submarines, yeah. So I was speaking to her sister recently. She called me and she said the wedding was a bit embarrassing because they had to cross the church or whatever you do when you're from different faiths because she was Catholic. And he said that she had to renounce Catholicism or he'd throw the engagement ring in the sea. So she
still
did.
took him.
She still took him, yeah. Yeah. And so she had her first child there in Perth, my Uncle Rick. And I have this story from my great aunt. As I said, she told me recently, my great aunt was about 10 and she went to visit my grandmother in the hospital, which was a convent hospital. And my grandmother hadn't told any of the family, but she hadn't heard from Opa for a long time. He was off at war. And while my great aunt, her young sister, was there saying, "What a beautiful baby, well done," in strides Opa, dishevelled and dressed in this American outfit. He'd been off on some adventure. His submarine had been lost and he'd been picked up by Americans. And I just think, it's not that long ago, but what a different world that you could lose someone like that and not know. And then in they come at this heightened emotional moment of having the newborn son in the arms. Now you just Skype or Zoom.
Yes. When you won the Vogel, and because of the pandemic this year, there wasn't the traditional party to celebrate.
Yeah. No free champers.
No. Have you since celebrated?
I celebrated at home with pizza but no, nothing official. No. Everything has been, well, not everything, most things have been done from home, from my kitchen table or my pantry, where the acoustics are good.
So what's it like now, Kate, now that you are a published author with an agent and a publisher and all the rest of it?
I feel very unsophisticated. I feel like everyone else knows what's going on and I don't. I don't actually have an agent because of winning the Vogel. I was just published directly with Allen and Unwin, which is great and fine. Many authors don't have agents, but I really am learning as I go along. You get this great advice, have good relationships with local booksellers, and I think, yes, I'd love to do that, but how do you go in and say, "Hi, I'm Kate and I've written a book. Do you want to talk to me?" So really, I feel like a little fish in a big pond.
Well, I expect the pandemic has changed everything there because I know with the Vogel winner from my years at the ABC, you won the Vogel, you embarked on a nationwide tour, you went into the ABC studios in every capital city.
Oh, did you?
You did bookshops, yes.
Oh, damn.
Well, I think so, it always looked like
Sounds
that.
right.
You got reviewed in all the big dailies and so on. There has been some of that, hasn't there?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I wasn't able to go to Sydney, which was a great shame. I was excited, but of course I'm not complaining. It's a wonderful thing to have happened to me at any time, and there are people right now who are really suffering with COVID. So it would feel churlish of me to say, COVID ruined my book tour. So I just feel grateful, yeah. And it's kind of been interesting seeing how people are adapting to running things online that would have been in person. And in a way that's been a bit comforting because, like I said, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that other people have no idea what they're doing, but other people are in new uncharted waters too, in a sense.
You do know, of course, that writers of fiction, literary fiction in Australia, that you can't really make a living out of it, or so they say. Tom Keneally's done it, Colleen McCulloch did it.
Kate Grenville, no doubt.
I don't know, perhaps so. So does that worry you?
I've always found it really hard to think about the future in any but the most amorphous and blobby terms. I'm pretty happy with how things are now. It's kind of hard for me to imagine a time where I could be a full-time writer, even physically with my daughter, like where would I find the time to do that? Which obviously could happen. But I quite like the balance I have going on at the moment. I've always found my work teaching as being really rewarding, not because I can bore people rigid talking about grammar now, knowing the terms. I don't think you need to know the grammatical terms to be a good writer. It's more the human experience of engaging with these groups of people, often really diverse groups within themselves, and people from cultures very different from my own, like Saudi Arabia. Learning from them so much has informed my writing.
In what way?
Well, for example, I had this relatively low-level class in Auckland once. Again, a really good diverse mix. And we were talking about the language of advice and problem solving. And the students, I gave them little scenarios and they had to talk about them and think, what advice would you give to your friend in this situation? And one of them was that you're throwing a dinner party and you've invited two friends who were in a relationship and you've learnt that they've broken up and it's really messy and they don't, they're not going to want to come and see each other, but they don't know that they're both coming, and what do you do? And most of the class said, well, throw two smaller parties, that's my advice to you. And one young woman said, throw a costume party and they won't recognise each other. And my whole career has been peppered with these little moments of uniqueness coming from another person's brain, which I feel have really enriched me.
Thank you so much, Kate, for coming in today. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And what are you going to do when you go home today? Are you going to go straight to the writing desk?
I'm going to go and write before I go home, actually. I've got this time. My daughter's with my husband, so I'm going to take advantage of it.
So before you go home?
Yes.
Where?
I'm going to go and find a cafe.
Oh, you can write in cafes?
I can, yeah. That's where I get a lot of it done, actually. Home is not a good, quiet working place.
The noise doesn't distract you?
No, I quite like it, actually. Yeah, I find it quite invigorating.
Must be your youth, I think.
Well, I only just scraped in that under 35 Vogel requirement.
Same as with the deadline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks again, Kate. Lovely to talk to you.
Thanks, Annie. It's been a pleasure.
The Tamar Valley Writers Festival podcast series is sponsored by Events Tasmania, M Visuals, and the award-winning Turner Steelhouse Distillery at Grindelwald, home of Three Cuts Gin, the perfect accompaniment to a night of reading. For more information on any books mentioned in this program, please visit Petrarch's, Launceston's major bookshop and a wonderful supporter of the Tamar Valley Writers Festival.